Great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
You bet. So I want to begin our conversation with what we went through for the last 3.5 years, going through a pandemic. As an artist, how did you get through it, and how has it changed you?
Well, I was honestly, I think I was very lucky because in the September of 2020 was when I moved to Boston to start my studies at New England Conservatory of Music, which remained open. And really, I felt very lucky because although we were getting 3 times a week, tested 3 times a week, getting tested 3 times a week, and it was of course kind of like an adjustment, but I was able to make music with people, and although wearing masks and changing room every 30 minutes and all of that, but at the same time, in terms of that I could make music and study. That was definitely amazing. At the same time, of course, during the pandemic was also tough in a way because in Armenia, in my homeland where I come from, there was a war happening at the same time. So it was very mixed, definitely a very transformative time for me in many ways. The growth at NEC, but also this living a whole life-changing experience with the war and pandemic, being far from my family and my homeland. So so many mixed things. I definitely it didn't feel like 2 years. It felt like I've grown for 5, 6 years or
Yeah,
something.
it's been a long
So
time for sure.
yeah,
Well, your debut album came out, Distance. That has to feel refreshing and good to kind of reemerge and have the album. How does it feel?
absolutely. Most of these songs were written in the fall of 2020, so it's been a long time. So I feel like I've lived with those songs for years, and I was so ready for them to be out in the world, and it felt amazing to finally share this music with people, but at the
Sure.
same time it was kind of also liberating to give this out to the world. So great, really great. It was very exciting. We had a couple of concerts in East Coast and West Coast, and during this fall. So it was great. It was great to share with this music with people.
And a debut is a big deal. I mean, it's your opening statement to the world. It's your opening statement, more importantly, to the world of jazz. So, what are you ultimately hoping the listener gets from this album?
The most of this music was, as I said, was written during the fall of 2020. So this is amidst of pandemic. It really, everything that I was going through at that moment was reflected at this album. And at that time when I was writing the music, I didn't think that this is going to end up in my debut album. But then it just made a lot of sense to document this period of time that, especially most of it is connected to the war that was happening in Armenia, and it wasn't being much talked. At this side of the world, people barely knew what's going on that side of the world, and this is definitely my, um, an expression of who I am, who I was at that moment, and my musically it really shows this all of these different worlds that I come from, sonic worlds, from classical jazz to Armenian folk music, but it also really captures a moment of time, and it tells a story. And what I thought was that beyond introducing people who I am, if people with this album might learn a little bit more about the story of Armenia and what's happening there, it would have meant the world to me. And it warmed my heart when some people reached out to me, people that I never know from different parts of the world. They said, because of this, we at least just went and tried to read more about this and understand what's going on.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So let me ask you this. How did your music journey begin? How did jazz become your focus and how did you get into music?
Well, I come from a musician family. My mom is an opera singer, a very accomplished opera singer, with whom I grew up with, and it was definitely, I grew up in an opera theater, and so music was part of my life since the beginning.
Yeah.
But I studied classical piano since I was 5, and it was kind of like no brainer. It was just I had to do it. But of course, I developed a tremendous love towards classical music. But as I was, mm, maybe I was 13 or 14, and I went to the first live jazz concert in Armenia.
Mhm.
And since then, it completely changed my life. I wanted to sing jazz. But those two worlds kind of went in parallel, classical music and jazz, because I ended up going to the conservatory and did my bachelor's as a classical pianist. But in parallel to that, I was singing with Armenian State Jazz Orchestra. I was one of the vocalists. And since I was 15, I was performing with them, but also I had my trio. So I started with singing very traditional jazz in parallel to my classical piano um, studies. And then just, NEC was kind of the place where two of these worlds came together. Um, I mean, before NEC, I was also performing in Los Angeles for a couple of years. And NEC just felt perfectly right, because this was the school where I saw that these two worlds really come together perfectly. And that was very liberating, because I was just being myself, and I was composing, and whatever came out just came out, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Who were early influences from the jazz world?
Oh, early influences, definitely Bear Harris and Bud Powell and Art Tatum. And I was listening to, Carmen McRae was such a huge influence. The how expressive that was. I think I carried that till this day. I think the expressiveness of Carmen McRae when it comes to lyrics, um, it's something that stayed with me till this day. And um, yeah, early
Yeah.
influences definitely those, and then it just kind of developed and
Yeah,
changed.
absolutely. So what was the first live jazz show that you saw that really blew you away?
So in Armenia, there is an incredible jazz pianist, Vagan Hayrapetyan, who was one of Bear Harris's students,
Yeah.
and he really introduced me to bebop. And so I went to his concert. It was a trio, and I was blown away. It was phenomenal to me. I was like, this is such a different world. And then I reached out to him, and I was 14 or 15 or something. And him, and also Armen Houston, who was artistic director of Armenian State Jazz Orchestra, they kind of started mentoring me in Armenia. And then I started traveling to Rome from Armenia, where Barry Harris every year would go and give master classes. And it was such an event. I mean, I can't forget those days. Um, so yeah, that's
Yeah.
how things developed.
So was it always a dream to come to America?
No, I never really dreamed about it. I think it just kind of happened because, well, there's a whole story around it, but my family eventually moved, and at some point I knew that I'm going to move as well. So gradually we all moved, but I think it was great. I think at some point, um, I felt like it's really a time for me, because I was playing this music in Armenia, which honestly, there's an amazing scene then, which is also mind blowing and mind blowing. Every time I go back there, I'm like, how is this even happening? Um, but uh, but it was time. It was
Yeah.
time to you know to really be around so many musicians. And honestly, once I started performing here, and now I perform with so many musicians that I couldn't even dream about to perform with. um I mean, it was so on, like, we did the album release first of all, I recorded with Daria Polaskevich I mean, Christian Newman and Vardan and all of these people, but also then I did the release show in New York with Ari Honig and Joe Martin. So it was like Steve Wilson. So it's just it's been a beautiful journey, and I'm so I feel very lucky that everything developed the way it developed, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've been at this for a while. What is it that you love the best about being a professional musician? What do you look forward to? What really gets you going in this process?
Oh, uh, it's constant curiosity, I think, um, and never having a sense of arrival. I think it never feels enough
Yeah.
musically, because there's always so much more, and you feel like you discovered something new, but then once it feels like you catch that, then there's so much
Yeah.
more in the world, and it's just a constant. It feels like once you're in it, it can't stop. Um, and discovering more in music, but also everything that is in parallel to it, because it's also learning stories, life stories, and um, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
So why do you
curious.
love jazz? Yeah. Why do you love jazz?
Jazz. Um, the freedom. I think there's so much freedom in it within a clear. I love how balanced the rules and the freedom are in
Yeah.
this in the music. I mean, there is of course so much more, but this is the first thing that comes to my mind,
Yeah.
because as a trained classical musician, I feel like that was something that was lacking. I think the well, at least when I was younger, I felt like, oh, the expression is so much limited, how expressive you can be or what you can express to this, because there's so, you want to really, the ideal classical performer is really always digging deeper to understand what was the composer's intention, which is, I think, of course, it's you go through that process really with jazz as well.
Yeah.
But then there's a moment where you can just break everything and then put it all together again, and then always find something new. But now that I think about it, now I think in classical music it's the same thing. It's just a different approach.
Yeah.
Uh, so that was the first thing that came to mind. But
Yeah.
also it's of course it never ending appreciation for this tradition and how it developed. I don't know. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking of this tradition, we're entering a new year. We're coming out of a pandemic. How strong do you feel like jazz is at this point? Like in the community that you're in and just overall, your debut's out. How strong do you feel the jazz community is?
That's an interesting question. Some people might disagree with me, but I think it's just, this is really my perspective. I think now more than ever, um, the boundaries have, there's so much cross within the genres.
Yeah.
People are just um, with all this access to everything else going on in the world that we have. I think jazz and different genres really open their doors, and it's just so much. A lot of things are happening within one we might call jazz, but um, and even myself, I sometimes I'm scared to say that I'm purely jazz singer or jazz composer, because I think the music that I write really carries so many other traditions, and I see that a lot in my colleagues and in the world overall have right now, which I love,
Yeah.
honestly. I think that brings us closer to each other,
Yeah.
and that's very beautiful.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's my
Well
observation.
said. Yeah, no, I agree. I think I noticed a lot of new elements were coming into the jazz idiom. There was a lot of
Yeah.
electronic elements. There was just all of these new things that were getting interjected into it. And it almost seems a little bit like it was the Miles vision. You know, he
Yeah.
really did want to expand the vernacular of this art form to not have any barriers. I mean, that was originally why it came around. I mean, when the practitioners of bebop were making it, there was this whole idea of the old figs, the guys that were in the swing big band era, and then you had these new cats. And I think there's levels of that that are just going to continue to accentuate. Now they'll have different labels, but there's going to be
Yeah.
that still that mission that we're going to expand this because it's like space. There's no wall. It doesn't end.
Absolutely.
There's just going to be stars as far as you travel, you know. So it's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Yeah. No. Um, and it just happens so naturally, you
Yeah,
know. I think um and that's the beauty of it.
yeah,
It's and I'm curious to see where things are going to develop.
yeah,
How it also challenges you in a way because it almost you don't even want to uh, stay in certain boundaries
yeah.
and yeah,
Yeah,
so
you want to expand out for sure. So let's get to the essence of you. Everyone has this perception of you, family, friends, fans, it's your debut album, but you're in control of everything. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
oh wow. um yeah, well, I think as a well, I'm as honest. I think I'm very honest in my music, so hope so it really reflects in music as well. And I think I come from a very like rich culture and very the culture that you can't live in Armenia and don't care not carry that all of the traditions and the mentality and everything, and it just somehow um um every Armenian I feel like feels this is the no matter how far you are, you really carry that.
Yeah,
um so I think I have um I'm someone who really honors traditions, and I honor that in others as well. I love learning about uh, about you know my friends who or people who where they come from and what I love learning about ancestors. I feel like we carry so much of
yeah,
that, and sometimes we don't even acknowledge. Um, I have a lot of curiosity for that, and but at the same time I'm very experimental. i like to I like to see how, you know, I want to break the walls and see what I can do, but at the same time there's a side of me who really is it almost grounds me and reminds me all the time where I come from or what are the things that really core values that I have that I carry. And um yeah, it's I don't know if this makes sense, but
yeah.
that's
It makes total sense. So the debut album is Distance. It's out now. Where's the best place to get it? And if anybody wants to catch you live now that the new year is opened up, how can they do that?
yeah, well, it's available on all streaming platforms, Apple Music, Spotify, everything, and it's also available on Bandcamp. You can purchase the. I also have physical CDs. I don't know if people still use those, but
Right.
typically some people buy them, and
Yeah.
which is, I think, at this point, it's almost like a souvenir. But
Yeah.
yeah, you can purchase them on Bandcamp. They're also available on my website, astghikmusic.com. So yeah, I think everywhere.
Yeah, it's all over the place. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for opening up. Thanks for talking about your world of music and the album. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your time, Joe. Thank you.
Absolutely.